Now starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Rapid7 webcast, Breaking the Kill Chain, How to Protect Against User-Based Attacks. My name is Kelly Garofalo and I'll be your host for this webcast. Today's webcast will run for approximately 1 hour, including time for questions at the end. We will record the session and make a copy of the recording available on the webcast section of the Rapid7 site, as well as email it out to you all in the next few days. You can ask questions at any time using the chat feature, and we will try to address them during the Q&A. All right, attendees of this webcast are eligible for 1 CPE credit. You can self-report on your organization's website, and we strongly recommend you keep the email invitation as confirmation for possible future audits. For detailed instructions on how to self-report, please visit bit.ly/r7cpe and note that the URL is case sensitive. Now, finally, today's presenters are Lateral Ashodotan, Senior Product Marketing Manager for UserInsight at Rapid7, and Christian Kirsch, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Metasploit at Rapid7. So now over to you, Christian.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. So let's open up with what we've seen in recent times. You notice that we're talking in this webcast about user-based attacks. So why are we doing this? Basically because we've seen an increase in attacks and successful breaches where the user has been the target through stolen credentials, through phishing, through areas where the user has been in the focus. And if we think about how we've traditionally tried to protect networks, it's always been to focus on the asset. And at Rapid7, we think that continues to be true as an important vector, but focusing on the user is definitely as well important, and it's actually a pretty good way to track your security, because ultimately it's the users who have access to data, it's the users who have access to the systems and who monitor and set up and maintain the systems. So they're a major part of your security architecture and ecosystem. So it's not only a couple of anecdotes where we're seeing users as a target in breaches, but also if we look at the quantitative data. So what you're seeing here on the screen is an overview of how different attack vectors have emerged over time. And this is a graphic from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report from this year. So for example, if we look at credentials last year versus the year before, or even long term, it's constantly risen up in the ranks. And if you look at the absolute number of incidents that were reported, 203 versus 422, that's not only increasing three steps in the ranks, but that's actually more than doubled in terms of how often an attack has been used on the system. So credentials are typically associated to users, unless it's a system credential, but most of the times we're talking about user credentials here. Phishing definitely is attached to users. So here the attackers are directly targeting users. And again here, it's risen in rank and also in the absolute number. And then also some other areas like privilege abuse has maybe not risen in rank, but has still gone up in number. So we're seeing a clear trend here that the user has become the target of the attackers. At Rapid7, we always look at the types of attacks because we strongly believe that if you understand the attacker mindset and the attacker methodologies, then you can better protect against the attacker. So where do we draw that knowledge from? Well, there are really two areas. First of all, Rapid7 is the company behind Metasploit, which is the world's leading penetration testing tool. It's an open source and a commercial tool that we offer. And so this tool helps you to simulate real-world attacks on your network. As I said, it's an open source system where we have contributions containing the latest attack vectors. Often, for example, with the Heartbleed vulnerability and some other vulnerabilities, they become available very, very quickly. And we draw on a community of about 200,000 members to help us in that effort. Also, our Rapid7 professional services team runs their own penetration tests and actively simulates attacks, but they also do incident response. So they have visibility into a lot of breaches where we actually analyze what happened, how do we respond to it, and which path did the attacker take in. So we take all of that in and try to understand how breaches happen, and then on that basis develop our products to help you protect against the attackers. So one thing that we are highlighting as part of this webcast, and one common thread that we have, is the concept of a kill chain. And kill chain, the terminology was used in the beginning in the military domain. In 2011, Lockheed Martin actually took that on and moved it into cyber world, kind of highlighted that term, and we thought it was a really good way to describe how attackers move, or like what the different steps are in an attack. And so before we jump into the cyber world, I would like to explain what a kill chain looks like and how to think about it, because that might help you think about the attack and then how to defend against the attack. So let's take the example of shoplifting. So let's not talk about the cyber world for a moment. If you want to steal something from a store, you probably want to start by staking out the store first. Then you need to enter the store, steal the item, and get out again, right? So that's kind of like the kill chain, and you can now try and see where you can hook into that chain and disrupt that chain. Because if you're able to disrupt that chain at any point, then you can stop people from stealing stuff from your store. So staking out the store, you could look for suspicious behavior. It's a possibility. It might be a little bit difficult. Entering the store, you can screen visitors for known thieves. That might also work a little bit, but it's also difficult. Where most people hook in here is for stealing the item, you know, the CCTV cameras to detect theft, store detectives that help you catch a thief in the act, and then also security labels when people are trying to get information, sorry, not information, actually the goods out of the store. Then the alarm bells ring, and you can catch them there. So if we now apply this same concept to user-based attacks, we can see the same kind of concept. And note here that we're using slightly different stages from the stages introduced by Lockheed Martin in 2011, because we're talking about a very specific type of attack, and we thought that a different categorization works better and lends itself better to the landscape of these kinds of breaches, but the same concept still applies. So first of all, what an attacker has to do is to compromise the account, an account then for attack a user, then access and discover on the network, move laterally across the network, and in the end, access and exfiltrate the data, because that's the information that they want to get out. So let's have a look at the different areas, how people are actually using that. So first of all, compromising accounts. You can compromise credentials through phishing attacks, where you send an email to somebody and include a link to a malicious site and actually try to simulate the target page with a fake form, and you harvest the credentials there. Let me give a concrete example to tell you how this works. So for example, you could send out an email to say, hey, we've now got this new web portal for reading your emails, and you send people a link to your own server that hosts a fake version of Outlook Web Access. You tell people, hey, just use your domain credentials to log on, and they log these credentials and then use that to actually access the network. You can also search online for published credentials. We've known that many attackers actually publish the databases of breached credentials on the internet. So a few years back it was the LinkedIn database, Adobe had a breach that involved a lot of credentials and so on, and there are many, many others. And because people share the same password across different services, this is actually fairly effective in breaking into companies now. You just you look at the email address. If it's a company email address, you know, all right, that belongs to somebody working in that company. You try out the same password, and that can get you into the network. Or you can collaborate with an insider, kind of getting their credentials, bribing them, or blackmailing them to get access to credentials. You can also simply compromise a user device. So phishing can also be used to run exploits, either file format exploits or browser exploits, browser plugin exploits on the machines to take over the device and then steal credentials from there or use the network, use the device to access the network. In the next step, accessing and discovering the network, users will then, for example, try to VPN into a network to get local network access. They will often hide behind a Tor proxy to hide their tracks. And inside the network, they will then try and scan for hosts and services on that network that they can try credentials out on or try to exploit. As a next step for moving laterally, so that basically means moving sideways in the network and compromising more and more machines, what folks often do is they reuse credentials on other hosts and services. So they will try out, hey, what other hosts and services does this person have access to with these credentials? They will access those machines and then what we call loot those machines to gather more gather more credentials from those machines. So for example, if I have a Windows machine and it's my laptop, but my admin and my colleagues have used it at a certain point in time, there might be cached credentials from that, from these events on my machine that you can loot and then leverage in subsequent stages of an attack. And you can, of course, also escalate your privileges. You can go from a regular user to an admin account, and you can use that through local exploits. You can loot credentials locally and use those credentials to escalate your privileges. And that's often this moving laterally process is often an iterative process. So you will use credentials to get access to some machines, loot credentials, use these credentials again to gain access to more machines and more machines and more machines, loot the credentials at each step, and therefore be able to take over an entire network pretty quickly. Once you have owned a substantial part of the network, you will then have access eventually to some valuable data. And you will try to exfiltrate that through, so exfiltration basically means getting the data out. You will try to do that through different means. A lot of people embed it in HTTPS. It's encrypted. It's a standard type of communication that doesn't raise a lot of flags. So you can use that to safely send data out of the network without a high risk of detection. You can also send it up to cloud storage. A lot of people use, Dropbox, Box.com, Google Drive, and so on. And so that also is regular normal traffic that doesn't raise a lot of flags. So some people will use that to send information out of the organization. And then basically you've completed your task. You can sell off that information on the black market and move on to the next target. So that's what we see as the user-based attack kill chain. Now, I mentioned that with Metasploit, we try to take the viewpoint of an attacker. So I quickly want to show you how you can replicate these kind of attacks and stimulate those on your network to see two things. A, can you get in? And B, can you actually detect these kinds of attacks on your network? So let's start with compromised accounts first. So with Metasploit, you can run phishing campaigns that either harvest credentials. We can clone web pages, so for example, LinkedIn pages, Outlook Web Access, or maybe a VPN HTTP service and server and so on that looks exactly like the service that you use internally. You send people a phishing email, they click through, access that resource, and leave their credentials behind. We can also exploit the browser directly or use malicious attachments to get into the machine. or in some cases we trick the user, for example, to accept a certain execute a certain Java application that will give us local access to their system. Then as a next step in accessing and discovering the network, if we've already compromised the host, we can use what we call a VPN pivot on that host to gain local network access. So that's basically using the compromised machine that's inside a company boundary already, and using that as, let's say, the attacker's VPN gateway. So we have an encrypted tunnel into that machine, and now we have full local network access, and we can scan the network from there and discover hosts and services and map out our next step of the attack. Then for moving laterally, we can brute force passwords on the network, all different kinds of services, Windows passwords, Unix passwords, databases, but also things like VNC, PC Anywhere, all the remote access solutions and remote management solutions that you might have on your network. Sometimes these are using weak passwords or shared passwords, and this has actually been identified on the Verizon report as one of the attack vectors, especially for crimeware and for POS devices. So this is a big attack surface for a lot of companies. We can also reuse passwords that we've gathered in previous steps. We can crack password hashes and also use password hashes itself in a pass-the-hash attack to get access to additional systems without having to figure out the plain text password. When we do this, each time we get access to a new system, we loot credentials from those machines. We can either take the password hashes that are locally stored. We can look at in-memory passwords through a module called Mimikatz. We can steal credentials from browsers, cached credentials in the browser. So if you're using, let's say, something like Salesforce.com or another web application, we can steal cached credentials there. And we can also escalate privileges through local exploits or looting local credentials for a local admin, for example, and using that to get into a higher plane of users to an admin level. And then at the end, we can access and exfiltrate the data by looting data from the machines. Once we've compromised the machine, we have full access to whatever that user has access to, so we can upload, download files. We can access anything that the user can access. And we can move that either to the Metasploit host, which is the attacker machine, or we can move it sideways into another machine or a cloud service. So this is basically an overview of how we can simulate an attack. And now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Lateral to talk a little bit about different ways of how you can detect each one of these steps on your network when you have an attacker coming in. So Lateral, do you want to take over from here?
Thank you, Chris. So as Chris described, the problem of user-based attacks and compromised credential is on the rise. And since we have Metasploit that provides us, as you just saw, the knowledge of how an attacker would behave, Rapid7 decided that it is the right time to develop a tool, a system that will be able to detect and investigate those attacks in a very efficient and in a way that would save time. The Verizon Data Breach Report clearly showed that there is a need to close the gap between the compromise and data exfiltration to the time that an attack is being discovered. This probably is even worse when talking about compromised accounts and vectors using users because they are very hard to detect. Because they are very hard to detect, in most cases, while compromise and exfiltration would take in 88% of the time minutes only, the time to discover lags behind, and in 85% of the time to discover will be weeks while 13% of the time it will take months to discover. There is a great need to put emphasis on user-based attacks, and this is why we come here today to tell you that think about building tools or using current tools to make sure that they are able to detect those. So looking at the kill chain, I want to take you step by step and show you how UserInsight in some very basic use cases would detect those stages. As with the shoplifting use case, it is important to go through the whole kill chain and try to detect and have capabilities to detect each and every step of the kill chain, because the attackers can use different steps, because they can vary their methodologies, having multiple capabilities of detection throughout the kill chain helps you make sure that you're able to stop the kill chain and investigate it as fast as possible to get into remediation. So starting from compromised accounts, there are lots of ways to compromise users, and it's probably the hardest thing to detect. It's very hard to know when people having the credentials stolen or having the password breached in a way. We provide in UserInsight a few use cases that helps you detect account compromise. One of them is involvement of accounts in mega breaches like the Adobe breach or the LinkedIn breach, where a lot of passwords were just dropped to the network. As we assume, unfortunately, that people reuse passwords across different systems, and as Chris said, attackers could just go and try those passwords that they got hold on through the darknet, reuse them and try to get into your network. Statistically, there are good chances that they will get into the network. By getting good visibility to accounts that are part of those breaches, you're able to get control and ask people to just change their passwords or make sure you put systems to make it harder for attackers to come in. Phishing, as was mentioned before, is one of the most increasing methodology to get into the network. The Verizon data breach report says that 18% of people getting a phishing link in a mail would click it. 9% will download an attachment, and 9% would eventually fill up a form that will help the attacker compromise the credentials. It is highly important that if you have somebody in the organization that is able to detect that a phishing mail was sent to him, you will be able to trace it and see who else got phished. In UserInsight, we provide you an easy way just to go search and find out who got this link. In this case, a phishing mail was sent with a domain that imitates LinkedIn. And if you want, you can just pull off all the users that got a mail that includes LinkedIn. Obviously, you will have a lot of legitimate mails over there, but you will be able to fast screen through who got a real phishing link and who not. Since the statistic is that 9% would click on a phishing mail, or 18% would click and 9% would fill up a form, it is important to catch it as fast as possible and know how many are affected to be able to contain the attack. Moving on to the access of the attacker. It is important to see when and where people get into your network, and if you're able to stop it, then no damage is done because they did not reach to the data so far. Most commonly, the attacker will not sit at your office, so obviously there will be a remote access to the network. With UserInsight, you would detect remote access, or actually it's multiple authentication to the network through VPN, through mobile device, or through managed cloud services like AWS, Salesforce, Google Apps. So assuming I'm the one now sitting in Boston, authenticating to VPNs through my laptop, I will be shown on this map. But if my Salesforce account is being compromised and accessed from Shanghai at the same time, that would be shown as an alert in real time. And that will be a way for you to go and check whether this is an okay, legitimate remote access, or is there something suspicious and somebody is entering your network. Another way that is common for attackers to hide their trails and not being seen as a remote access is to come to the network through a Tor or anonymous proxy. We also alert our users when we see traffic, as normally we don't think that organizations should have Tor or proxy access to the networks. So that's something that you will easily detect and be able to go and see whether it's legitimate or not. Moving forward, the attacker, once compromised the network, once got inside, as Chris mentioned, will start scanning. They will start scanning for assets. They will start mapping the network. They will start looking for more creds. We enable our customers to deploy on the network honeypot users and honeypot assets. So this will be dummy users that will only trigger a traffic once accessed. Obviously, only an attacker will get into a dummy user, and that will trigger an alert. The same with honeypot assets. You can set a very nice dummy asset on the network. You can call it important financial data if you wish. We will fire an alert once this system is being accessed. This is a good way, by the way, to see if somebody is scanning your network. Once inside the network, once getting hold of some credentials, the attacker will start moving laterally. They will go from one asset to another using different privileges. It's this stage. They're doing so much things over the network that the behaviors on the network change. And a lot of the effort that we put in UserInsight is to detect the different behaviors that deviate from normal network behavior and be able to sign you that somebody is accessing and moving inside your network. One easy way to see that something is wrong is that certain account privileges are now being escalated. As very commonly, privileges would be escalated to enable access to critical assets. It is important to have a capability to detect it. Another thing that is important to detect is when disabled accounts become re-enabled. And in many attacks, we've seen that the attacker will go and every few days re-enable a batch of disabled accounts that looks legit to the system and will usually go undetected. This enables them to stay longer in the network and get to more areas of it. Account impersonation is another way of getting from one machine to another, and that's something that we uniquely show when one account is becoming used by another account, and it's not a typical thing that we see once we start detecting user behaviors. We also show you a visualization in case you start investigating whether you have an attacker of the lateral movement through your network. We will show how users move from one asset, from one server to another. We'll show you which accounts are the one involved in the movement. So in case you suspect that you have an incident on your network, you're able to fast see what users are involved, which assets are involved, and actually with our Nexpose and Metasploit integration, you can also see the exploits on the assets. So you can get a very good, quick view of what is going on to be able to contain the attack. Brute forcing is another way of getting into compromising a machine, and that's another thing that we will alert you on. And then finally, after the attacker scanned the network, got into got privileges, he is now able to get into critical assets. With UserInsight, you can either tag your critical assets and tell us those are the assets that I want to get alerted when people access them, or if you have Nexpose and you have a real context tagging and the Nexpose tagging of critical assets, we integrate with that and we will alert you on the critical assets being accessed. So, for example, we will fire an alert when a critical asset is being accessed. We will fire an alert when we see a user authenticating to a critical asset for the first time, as it's not typical to have new users. And if this is a legit access, you will be able to dismiss this and not get any alert on this user accessing this asset anymore if you wish. We will also detect if an attacker comes from a user that got into this critical asset before but never used a certain device. So we will detect a first-time access to a critical asset from a new device. And that's, again, something that will show us that this account may have been compromised because there is a new device. Obviously, this could be legit, and you can close and not get alert anymore if it is legit. We try very hard not to be too noisy. Last but not least, once the data get hold of, the attacker would exfiltrate it. As said before, one of the ways to do it is by uploading it to a cloud storage and cloud service, things like Dropbox, Shoplifting, file sharing systems, and so on. UserInsight looks at the pattern usage of cloud services, and we put in particular focus on cloud storage and file sharing, as we know that that could be a good way to exfiltrate data from your system. And we will alert you if we see an abnormal amount of data exfiltrating to the cloud, or if an abnormal amount of data is being downloaded from the cloud. So that's another way to kind of close the loop on the kill chain. We believe it is important to look at the whole kill chain and have good system to be able to detect each and every step. We believe it's important to keep track on the changes that attackers, the new methodologies that attackers are deploying, and evolve our detection mechanism as they evolve. And we know how fast they move. So we should be able to move as fast in understanding how they break, how they move inside the network, and then how they get the data out so we can build the capabilities. So to summarize, today's environment means that you must understand the attack kill chain, especially user-based attack kill chain, because they become a growing vector of attacks, and not too many systems were built around users, while many of the great systems that we have were built around assets. Once we understand how attackers behave, we must have detection mechanisms to be able to detect. Unfortunately, most of us will be eventually breached, and attackers try to breach us every day. So we need to have the assumption that some way or another we would be breached. The question is, how fast do we detect it? How fast can we investigate? And how fast we can contain and remediate? And then, once you have the system, go and simulate the attacks to test your assumption and hypothesis. By having in combination UserInsight and Metasploit, you can have a detection mechanism, and then you can go and deploy pen testing and go and see whether UserInsight will detect when a pen tester compromise creds, get into the network, compromise assets, and so on. We offer you a free trial of our tools. Metasploit and UserInsight are available online in case you want to try them, and we would recommend that you go try it and talk to us. Tell us what new features you would like to have them. We're very much open to learning. This is the way we'll learn how to make our tools better. Thank you for that, and we're now going to move to your questions.
All right, thank you, Lateral. Thank you, Chris. To all audience members attending, you can submit your questions now, and I'll make sure to ask them during this session. So I'll jump right in with our first question. This is more for Chris. Your kill chain only shows users and credentials. What about exploits as an attack vector?
Sure. So very good question, actually. So we modeled this kill chain around user-based attacks. So that's why we've kept it simple and so on and focused on that. Of course, exploits are also part of the attack equation. Let's think about that for a moment. There are basically client-side and server-side exploits. Client-side exploits would be exploits that require an action from the user on the client side. So for example, a click on a link, opening an attachment, etc., etc. So that would also be user-centric and would compromise the machine there. Usually that's associated with phishing, and I think we're also covering that somewhat in the kill chain that we have. The other possibility is a server-side exploit. So here you try to gain remote code execution on a server, for example, and access data there. And unless the information you're looking for is already on that server, which is fairly rare that you'd have, or it's not a given, at least, that the server that has the vulnerability is also the server that you're trying to get data from, then the attacker will usually move laterally across the network, leveraging some of the credentials learned from that first machine and accessing other machines on the network. And that's where you also enter the attack chain or the kill chain that we outlined earlier. I hope that answers the questions. Attacking assets is a slightly different kill chain, but I think they actually overlap to a large extent.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, this one seems a little more geared towards Lateral. What kind of data do you pull to detect incidents?
That's a great question. So we actually source data from various IT and security systems within your network. So we will look at IDS, we would look at your SIM in case you have one. We will source data from your firewall. We will look at cloud services, and we will look at your mobile device. We do it through ActiveSync Exchange servers without deploying any agent. And we deploy a collector that will collect instances of behaviors from the different systems on your network. Then we do some analytics on it, and this is how we do our detection.
Thank you. Our next question, how can you deal with encrypted traffic exfiltration?
That's actually a very good one because Dropbox, for example, data that is being exfiltrated is encrypted, and unless a customer is decrypting it, we would not want to do it ourselves. The way we look at it is we look at the abnormal amount of data when we talk about things like Dropbox or SugarSync. When we look at managed cloud services, things like Box or Salesforce, we are deeply integrated with them. And with them, because we're integrated with the API, and since it's company provisioned cloud services, we are able to see it's beyond just the amount, but also see the data itself.
Thank you. And Chris, we have a question here for you as well. I test my passwords with Backtrack. Does Metasploit offer that same functionality?
Good question. Thank you. And I actually hear that question a lot. So let me quickly outline what Backtrack does. So Backtrack basically tries to brute force the password hashes that you can download, for example, from a domain controller to see if there are any weak passwords there. It can do that with Windows passwords and also the equivalent on Unix systems, Unix Linux systems. So that means it's offline and it's only for the operating system passwords. Typically, I would say you can already be fairly sure that your operating system passwords are secure through a password policy that you have in place if you check passwords when they're being changed. Of course, it's still good practice to actually test for weak passwords on that realm. So Metasploit can do some offline cracking, but we tend to focus more on what we call online cracking, or also online brute forcing. So we will try out passwords over the network against the live service. So we will try to log on through SMB, the operating systems, but we will also log on to, I think it's over a dozen, maybe close to 20 different service types, including things like VNC, PC Anywhere, different database types, HTTP, HTTPS, etc., etc. So there are a lot of different types of services that we can check that you wouldn't necessarily see through Backtrack. So any service that sits on top of the operating system. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Our next question, how would UserInsight help with brute force botnet attacks, which many people go through almost daily?
Okay, so with brute forcing, what we do is we deploy, the customer actually deploys a honeypot user. Once we see authentication to it, that would be a way of detecting that somebody is brute forcing the network. And we can deploy several of them, so that would show a brute force. Also, we detect all kinds of behaviors that are indicative of brute forcing, like authenticating from a place that we never saw before or an unusual location and trying to authenticate through a lot of different accounts. And so a lot of behaviors that are very indicative to brute forcing that we deploy detection to. I hope this answers the question.
Okay. Thank you. Our next one, is there an integration between Metasploit and UserInsight?
Sure. Do you want me to take that, Kelly? All right. Thank you. So yes, there is an integration on the phishing side. So for example, you can run simulated phishing campaigns against your user base through Metasploit, and then UserInsight will import that information, actually query it through the API, and enrich its own information on how risky a user is. So that will be factored into how likely they are to get breached, and help you bubble up users that might have been breached in the interface. Lateral, do you have anything to add there?
Just building on that point, we believe it is really important to understand user risks. So beyond just looking at detecting and looking at the alerts, we believe that you need to have good understanding of what users are doing, and part of it is Metasploit integration on this specific capability of showing how vulnerable users are for phishing campaigns. And then we can show you if people really got phished. So you can even measure, if you wish, the success rate of your simulated phishing campaigns in reality and see what happens with that, if that makes sense to you.
All right, thank you. This next question also for Lateral. How do you deal with impersonation of an admin since behavior can be hard to detect if the admins are constantly busy? So how do you discriminate for them?
So actually with admins, we put closed loop, and in case you will go through the free trial, you can go and see specifically admins' behaviors and drill down and see all the activities. We deploy some capabilities that show impersonation, and we have specific alerts for admin impersonation. This is done by our endpoint monitor that is using similar technologies to what we have in Expose. And with that, we are able to see when one account enters another account. Obviously, this could become noisy because, as you said, admins are busy, and there may be actions that would look like impersonation. And this is why we give a lot of freedom for our customers through the UX to tell us whether something is legit and turn it off, whether there are some things that are suspicious and want us to continue alerting them on.
Thank you. And Chris, this is a good one for you. Do you feel that security awareness training for users would be advantageous?
I think so, yes, absolutely. So phishing is one of the primary attack vectors, as we saw in the stats earlier. And you know, there are so many things you can do, only so many things you can do on the technology level. Educating your users about phishing, but also about other social engineering attacks is really important. So I do think that it's a good defense. You can never get to an absolute zero with security awareness, but you can't do that with technology either. So the way I think about security is you can mitigate your risk, and you can put defenses in place, you can test your assumptions, and you can detect intrusions. You can never bring it to zero, and it has to be a mix of technology, processes, and people.
Great answer. For Lateral, so if I already have a SIM in place, why would I want to add UserInsight?
So that's a very good question. We have several customers that find out that specifically for the detection use case with the SIM, either it's QRadar, Logarithms, Splunk. We've seen several of them. We know that getting hold of all those detection capabilities means in SIM manually building of queries. Well, some organization could do it, and as you can see, there are various ways to get into the network, and there are various vectors in the kill chain, various steps in the kill chain that need to be detected. Anyone that has a SIM knows that every new system that is added needs to be hooked to the SIM, and therefore some of the rules that you built may be broken. They need to stay on top of the recent attacker methodologies. They need to know what are the recent attacker methodologies. and just the constant update is not an easy role. And we find out that in many cases, SIEM has very good capabilities to gather all the information from the network, and SIEM data could just be pointed in UserInsight, and we significantly help with the detection use case, as well as cut short the investigation time by bringing an answer to the question, who did it? So if you get alerted on something and you get an IP and a timestamp of something that happens, it's what you typically get from all kinds of detection and alert systems that you have. It's very hard, or it may be not very hard, but it just takes time to go and figure out, okay, who owned this IP in a specific time frame, and then go figure out, okay, this user's, what device does he have, what assets did he touch, are those assets compromised, do they have vulnerabilities? With UserInsight, we help you get this picture in just a glimpse. You get into UserInsight and get an answer immediately, and this is the added value that we bring to the SIEM.
And we have time for about one more question here. So, Lateral, it's another one for you. Would UserInsight be able to detect data being exfiltrated via an SSL connection to a remote node?
So we do see that data is being transferred. However, unless, again, you want to terminate SSL by proxy, we will not be able to do it. We haven't seen so far organizations that are interested in terminating SSL. In case they are, then we will be able to see it. So we will see the data being exfiltrated but not be able to inspect it.
So often what you can see actually is a spike in traffic, and that might be indicative of exfiltration, even though you can't see what the data actually is, and that can trigger an investigation as well, right, Lateral?
Correct. We will trigger an alert on the abnormal amount of traffic.
Yeah, and if you check in with a user, you can ask them, hey, are you uploading stuff to the cloud? And if they say no, or if they don't have a legitimate reason, then that should raise some alarm bells.
And a little follow-on to this one, actually. Let me know if this makes sense. Can you C&C commands if they are encrypted and traffic is small in size?
That's a very good and technical question that I'll be happy to follow up on. I am not sure about that.
All right.
But I guess we can follow up after the call.
Yep, definitely. And any final thoughts from you guys on breaking the kill chain user-based attacks before we close out for the day?
Yeah, so I had one additional comment. There was a question on educating users. So one thing that I mentioned already was the ability in Metasploit to simulate phishing attacks and to measure security awareness. And what we can also do as part of that feature that I haven't talked about on this webcast yet is we can deliver training right then and there. When a user clicks on a malicious email that we simulate, we can say, hey, this was actually a phishing email, and here's how you could have recognized it. So kind of teaching the user in the moment, and that's often a very effective way to instill good behavior. So those are my final comments.
For me, I want to add that we talked a lot about detection, and automated detection is very important. I also believe that it's highly important to have general visibility, kind of know your normal steady state of the organization to be able to discover what's abnormal. There is so much that automated and abnormal behaviors detection could do, but by also having visibility to the behaviors, just having a daily look at where people are, what people are doing, especially those groups that need to be watched, like admins, like C-level exec, is another way that you can figure out when things go wrong.
On that note, that is all the time we have for today's broadcast. So if we weren't able to address your questions, we'll do our best to address them afterwards. Thank you to Lateral and Chris for your great information, and thank you everyone else for joining us. We hope to see you at another Rapid7 webcast again soon.
Thank you, Kelly. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kelly.